you, God.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7:15 this evening. Sorry, we're a little bit late due to a slight technical problem this evening. Anyway, I'm joined this evening in the studio by the SNP's Socialist Group co-convener, Chris McCusker. Welcome back to the show, Chris. You hearing me all right there? Yep. Okay, and on my right tonight is Sam Payton, who is also a co-convener of the Save Loch Lomond campaign. Welcome back to the show, Sam.
Hi, Gordon.
Hi there. Okay, so we're going to, without any further delays, dive straight into the coronavirus update for today. Now, as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there has been a total of 50,295 coronavirus tests concluded. And of these, 39,773 were confirmed negative. 10,521 tests were positive. The number of patients who were in intensive care last night is 134, with 121 of these having tested positive. There were a total of 1,762 people in hospital with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19. This marks an increase of 197 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection has now sadly risen to 1,262. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK figures available show that 21,092 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 360. Full data on the number of tests in England has not been published at the time this bulletin was prepared. Now, if I can come to you first, Sam, this evening, I've heard it said elsewhere today that we seem to have reached the peak now, and the numbers are gradually decreasing. And of course, the way that we're hearing the information sometimes changes, but it does seem that the numbers are reducing slightly each day.
Yeah, they do seem to be reducing slightly, which is good, but it's still heartbreaking because each one of those numbers represents a life. It represents someone's member of family, which is absolutely heartbreaking. But hopefully, we're at the beginning to kind of see the other side of this now. And hopefully that's us now starting to see the positive.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sam. And Chris, if I could bring you in at this point, I think I was telling you just before the show that I have now got a family member affected by COVID-19. It is beginning, at least for me, to come very close now, it seems, but at a time where we're hoping that we're past the peak of the infections now.
Yeah, that's and I was sad to hear that, Gordon. So I hope everything goes well in that regard. But one thing that's concerning me is that the way that the different administrations are actually reporting the actual stats during the week. And I read one report from James O'Brien and the LBC is that the reported figures in England could be double than what is actually being put out for common consumption at this moment in time. So I'm really quite concerned about that.
Forgive me, Chris, are you talking about the figures which are not being announced, the ones involving people who have died outside of hospital? Is that the case?
Yeah. I mean, basically, we have seen all along complete transparency from the Scottish Government with regards to figures, although it took us a couple of weeks to get up to speed with incorporating care homes and incorporating community deaths and whatnot and what have you.
But of course,
seems that England are not adopting that reporting.
It can be difficult sometimes as well for viewers to actually understand what's being said, because of course the figures which are coming from the care homes are coming in every week, and they come in a little bit later in the week, I think, than the figures that we are putting out today. for the hospitals.
There also seems to be a bit of dubiety over, any deaths at the weekend. It seems to take a couple of days in order to catch up and all the rest of it. So, I'm not holding the Scottish Government up, as some exemplary figure in this.
Yep.
I just feel that, in the round, once we have actually got over the top of the hill and coming down the other side, and the true figures actually come out, I think that the figures in England are going to be more alarming than what we are currently being told at this moment in time.
Well, I'm sure we'll find out eventually, Chris, when the numbers finally do come out. Now, I know that, Sam, you've rejoined us. I'm just going to move on to our next story, Sam, because I think I want to hear your views of this one. And the next story actually is an unusual one as far as I'm concerned, because this appears to be a new illness affecting children, which may or may not be linked to the coronavirus. Children are falling ill with a new and potentially fatal combination of symptoms apparently linked to COVID-19, including a sore stomach and heart problems. Children affected appear to have been struck by a form of toxic shock syndrome. Some have been left so seriously unwell that they've had to be treated in intensive care, and at least one has undergone extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. In a letter to GPs in North London, reported by the Health Service Journal, NHS bosses said it's been reported that over the last 3 weeks there has been an apparent rise in the number of children of all ages presenting with a multi-system inflammatory state requiring intensive care across London and also in other regions of the UK. There is a growing concern that a SARS-CoV-2 related inflammatory syndrome is emerging in children in the UK, or that there may be another as yet unidentified infectious pathogen associated with these cases. The NHS letter continues, abdominal pain and gastrointestinal symptoms have been a common feature, as has cardiac inflammation. This has been observed in children with confirmed PCR, positive SARS-CoV-2 infection, as well as children who are PCR negative. Serological evidence of possible preceding SARS-CoV-2 infection have also been observed. The SARS-CoV-2 is the official name of the virus that causes the disease COVID-19. Doctors have been told to please refer children presenting with these symptoms as a matter of urgency. It is not known if any of the children struck by the new syndrome have died. Professor Russell Viner, the president of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, sought to reassure parents that children are generally unlikely to become very unwell due to COVID-19. We already know that a very small number of children can become severely ill with COVID-19, but this is very rare. Evidence from throughout the world shows us that children appear to be part of the population least affected by this infection. Parents should be reassured that children are unlikely to be seriously ill with COVID-19, but if they're concerned about their children's health for any reason, then they should seek help from a health professional. So Sam, welcoming you back. I know we had a little problem with your connection just earlier on. This one is quite worrying, isn't it? I mean, as a father myself, when my children were small, this I would have found deeply troubling.
Yeah, sorry about my connection. I'm with Virgin and I believe there's a lot of problems with the network tonight. So I've kind of jumped onto my mobile phone network at the moment.
It's not the cat sitting on the cables again, is it, Sam?
No, it's not. He's kind of half asleep here. But anyway, about the kids, yeah, I've seen that today. And it is, as a mum, I'm quite concerned. So I had a wee quick kind of look into it. Because one of the things they're saying is stomach pain and an inflamed heart, which is your toxic shock syndrome and Kawasaki disease, which is a very rare disease, which affects children. But yeah, it is quite concerning. The thing is, as parents, we know with kids as well, and Chris will get this as being a parent as well. I mean, kids can show all sorts of symptoms and weird and wonderful symptoms for
Indeed,
all
yes,
different things. You know, especially when it comes to viral infection, viruses and things, they can have all sorts of weird and wonderful symptoms.
Well, even the COVID-19 can present in funny ways as well,
Yeah,
because I know my
yeah, so the
relative
kids,
had a gastrointestinal illness as a result of COVID-19 rather than the lung infection. So obviously there are some mutations.
Quite worrying and concerning. So as a parent, I mean, if I was to advise other parents, if you think anything's not right, just get phone the GP or phone NHS 24. Don't mess around.
Yeah.
As a parent anyway, if any of my kids have got unusual symptoms that is not easily explained, you know, that's what NHS 24 is there for, is phone up and get advice.
Indeed. If I might come to you, Chris, I know that you look after a relative yourself, but this obviously is affecting children, but this seems to be something completely new, something that nobody's heard of before.
Yeah. I have to stress that all my kids are over the age of 18, so I consider them adults, and they are free to live a life of religious fulfillment. You know, they are old enough and big enough to look after themselves, with the exception of my daughter, actually, who is disabled, and she's got the learning age of you know, roughly about a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old. So, and my wife, my ex-wife, does fantastic work with Caitlin. So, but yeah, it's more concerning about the fact that I was reading this, and my initial reaction was, stop letting your kids go out and play.
Uh-huh.
Do you know, like, I mean, stop them from congregating. I've seen kids in groups of 6, groups of 8.
Because the children, the children don't think it can happen to them, do they? They never think it will happen to them.
This is it, and this is where the responsibility does come down on the parent to say, look, I'm sorry, I know you want to go out, I know you're bored out of your tiny, but, you know, this thing is, you know, like too big for me to let you run about, you know, in the normal fashion that you do.
Well, I would guess, Chris, that probably the medical profession is going to keep a very, very close eye on this now for the foreseeable future, because this virus, the COVID-19 virus, seems to have all kinds of unpleasant side issues attached to it and complications arising from it.
Well, I have to reiterate what Day said on last Thursday's show when she was talking to her neighbour, who was a professor, albeit he's a professor in veterinarian health. But he basically said that this virus is going to be around for the next 100 years in some sort of shape and form. And, you know, people need to get used to the fact that things as we know it have changed dramatically, and we need to adapt.
Okay. Well, listen, Chris, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to our next story tonight. Eventually, we had to get to this. Now, Boris Johnson has now been signed off the sick. Mr. Johnson returned to work today after recovering from COVID-19 with a warning that it was still too dangerous to relax the stringent lockdown hammering Britain's economy for fear of a deadly second outbreak. Johnson compared the disease to an invisible street mugger whom Britons were wrestling to the ground. If we can show the same spirit of unity and determination as we've shown in the past 6 weeks, then I have absolutely no doubt that we will beat it, the 55-year-old said outside of Downing Street home a month and a day after testing positive. I ask you to contain your impatience, because I believe we are coming now to the end of the first phase of this conflict, and in spite of all the suffering that we have so nearly succeeded. With unemployment soaring, many companies crippled and recession looming, Johnson said he understood the concerns of business and would consult with opposition parties pressing for clarity on a pathway out of lockdown. But with Britain suffering one of the world's highest death tolls, 20,732 hospital deaths reported as of Saturday, he stressed that it was still a time of maximum risk and there would be no swift lifting of the restrictions. The lockdown has left Britain facing the possibility of the deepest recession in 3 centuries and the biggest debt splurge since World War II. Johnson's government, party and scientific advisors are divided over how and when the world's 5th largest economy should start returning to work, even in a limited form. The government is next due to review the social distancing measures on May the 7th. Johnson initially resisted introducing the lockdown, but changed course when projections showed that 250,000 people could die. Since the lockdown on March the 23rd, his government has faced criticism from opposition parties and some doctors for initially delaying measures, for limited testing capabilities and for a lack of protective equipment for health workers. His spokesman said that the government may not know if a target of 100,000 tests per day by the end of April has been met on Thursday because of a time lag with the data. Now, if I might talk to you first, Sam, about this. Now, I'm sure we're all delighted that Mr Johnson has made a full recovery, but he's emerged from Downing Street into the mother of all crises, I think, at the moment. He's come out just at the moment when we are hopefully reaching the high water mark in this epidemic. But now he and his ministers are going to have to try to decide when and how to start easing the lockdown. Now, we've heard a lot from Nicola Sturgeon in the last few days about the sort of conditions that she would want to put on that. We're not hearing so much from Mr Johnson, though.
Well, what can I say? He created a lot of this by basically not doing the lockdown quickly enough, and also as well, I mean, if we remember, they claimed that they had everything under control and everything, they were prepared, and it turned out that never came to pass. So a lot of this crisis is part of his planning strategy, so to speak. But in saying that, he needs to start kind of taking responsibility and actually kind of, sorting this out, because already too many people have lost their lives. But what I would be interested to know is when Boris Johnson was on the sick, did he get statutory sick pay, or was he entitled to his full entitlement from the Houses of Parliament?
But do you think he might get his 80% of his salary, Sam?
Yeah, so the thing is, when the rest of us are all on furlough or not working and not actually earning or having to claim universal credit and things like that, we're all living close to the breadline.
It should really be sick pay, Sam, surely. I mean, if he's sick, he should be getting sick pay rather than 80% of his salary.
He should, like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Well, saying that, us self-employed don't get sick pay. We get nothing. But yeah, it's very much a case of, it would be interesting to see how he's going to, because there is a lot of pressure at the moment from a lot of businesses that we ease the lockdown, and I know there's certainly a certain amount of petitions online wanting people wanting to ease the lockdown and open up certain things, which is absolutely crazy, because at the end of the day, even though the figures are starting to kind of come down, we're not out of the woods yet, and all it takes is for this to be eased off too early, and then we're going straight back into a second wave. And I would hate to think what would happen in a second wave, because if there's people who have already had mild symptoms of the virus, we don't know how that's going to affect their immunity. How's that going to affect them if they come into contact with it a second time?
Well, Sam,
with the kids, we don't really know what's happening with the kids either at the moment.
Yeah, I know, Sam, that from researching a little bit on the World War I epidemic in 1918, that there was a second wave, and it was bigger than the first. And this is something which is concerning both medics and politicians at the moment. So it's possible that it could be with us for a long time. Now, Chris, I noticed that you've made it back in back in time to answer my questions. Now, this business of the lockdown and when to lift it is a difficult one for Mr. Johnson, because many European countries and other countries around the world who were affected earlier are now beginning to slowly lift some of the sanctions that they've put on their own people. And it must be hard for Mr. Johnson now to justify keeping the lockdown in place.
Well, I've got two issues with Boris's triumphant return to the front line, shall we say? Whereby was he getting SSP or something like that? That's something that we will never know. But the one thing that really got my gander right up was the superlatives that he was using to make reference to the wartime. We are in the fight of our lives routine and all the rest of it. And the minute I hear anything to do with the war, I just turn right off. Do you know what I mean? It really, really, just rips my knitting. The second thing is, and I have to give him credit to a certain degree, because the capitalists within the Tory party, the Tory hedge fund managers, those people who donate to the Tory party, who rely on big business in order to make their oodles of money,
yes, shares
and not pay their
recently.
taxes. They're the ones that are putting pressure on him to restart the economy. And fair play, he's actually pulling back from that. He's to a certain extent, he is resisting the temptation to say, right, okay, let's get back to work next week, and free movement for everyone. So I have to kind of give him a certain modicum of respect for that, but we have to remember the fact that he's been out the game for a month here, so he's not calling the shots as the front bench of the Tory party, who are taking this softly approach, and quite rightly so. They have to, because if they went gung-ho back into business, as Sam says, and we get a second surge of COVID-19, I think that's going to set Britain back immeasurably.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. I'd like to move along now to the next item on this evening's programme. Now, this is also linked to COVID-19. The World Health Organization chief says that the pandemic is far from over. The World Health Organization's warned today that the coronavirus pandemic was far from over, and he said he was deeply concerned about the impact of disruption on normal health service, especially on children. The pandemic is far from over, said WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, adding that the body was concerned about increasing trends in Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and some Asian countries. We have a long road ahead of us and a lot of work to do, he said. He added that shortages of vaccines against other diseases were being reported in 21 countries as a result of border restrictions linked to the pandemic, citing the Gavi Global Vaccine Alliance. The number of malaria cases in the sub-Saharan Africa could double, he said, and that doesn't have to happen. We are working with countries to support them. Now, Chris, to me, this looks as if Ghebreyesus is basically saying that we mustn't take our eye off the ball with other health issues, and that COVID-19 has tended to obliterate everything else from the radar screen as far as medical emergencies are concerned in other parts of the world. Now, I know that you have some experience in dealing particularly with refugees and asylum seekers, Chris, but I can imagine that it must be extremely difficult particularly for NGOs working in developing and underdeveloped countries where the health service doesn't exist, but they need to get these drugs and other essential equipment to these areas.
Yeah, well, I mean, as really, really quite worrying. that certain things will be sacrificed in order to concentrate on the one thing. There are still villages in Africa that don't have clear running water, which obviously contributes to poor health and stuff like that. With regards dysentery and all that kind of caper, as well as Ebola. There is also the ongoing issue with food, as well as irrigation,
and malaria was
also,
mentioned as well, Chris.
The sexual health of those people as well. But it's not just in those. We can't categorise it as in it's predominantly happening in Africa, and the reason is because that's a poor country. We also see that, and this is something else that we could I basically could talk at length about, is the fact that we see Israel turning around to Palestine and basically saying, you're not getting anything to help in the fight of COVID-19, and we're prioritising the Israeli people, before we even think
Chris,
about any help for you.
Chris, if I may, you could characterise the response of many countries as being very much, every man for himself, as it were. But if I could come to you, Sam, the idea that a disease which we've been battling for such a long time, like malaria, is becoming harder to fight now because COVID-19 has shut borders in various countries. We can't get the drugs to people who need them.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the problems we see with COVID-19, where we're going to kind of get a knock-on effect with a lot of other diseases throughout the world, because COVID is making, it more difficult to get vaccines around, the world. So I think this is going to be a standard problem. I definitely think it is, and it's going to be one that countries are going to have to address.
Well, the other thing I would imagine, Sam, that would imagine that perhaps some of the NGOs who desperately need to get medics, nurses and other specialists to these places won't even be able to fly in because so many places are actually closed down that they can't get a flight.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Even though, especially, we hear on our news and media and things like that, essential travel only, but there'll be countries that are in complete lockdown where there'll be nothing at all. But again, that's something that the World Health Organization and the United Nations are going to have to talk about and have the discussions and make sure that the vaccines are getting there. Otherwise, we're just going to see a resurgence in so many different diseases throughout the world, especially in the kind of poorer regions of the world.
Indeed. It seems actually as if there is no part of the world, and there is absolutely no part of life anywhere in the world which isn't affected by COVID-19. Yeah,
it's unprecedented, isn't it? We've never really seen anything like this before, especially in modern era, so it's quite scary. It's certainly, we've entered into a new kind of world, really.
Well, anyway, I think just for the time being, we'll move away from the COVID-19 virus just now to something completely different, and that is Michael Gove has said that Brexit talks can still be done within the agreed timescale. Talks to strike a deal on a post-Brexit relationship between Britain and the European Union can still be concluded within the agreed timescale, according to Michael Gove. Last week, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said that discussions had made little progress and that Britain had set a tight deadline by ruling out an extension to the Brexit transition period beyond the end of 2020. We believe it's still entirely possible to conclude negotiations on the timetable that has been outlined, Gove told a parliamentary committee. He said that the British text for talks would be published in a matter of weeks and that both sides would take stock at the end of June. He declined to say whether Britain would walk away if there had been insufficient progress. Now, Chris, being more of a political personality, shall we say. I'll let you deal with this one first. What do we make of Michael Gove's statement that the talks can still be done within the agreed timescale? Is this actually realistic, Chris?
I don't think that it is, but my main worry is the fact that the UK government will take that as it's the 31st of December. There's no agreement in place. That's fine. Then we'll just go for a no-deal Brexit, and that will be their get-out clause. That's how they will sell it to the country. They will turn around to the country on the 31st of December and say, due to COVID-19, we were unable to get an agreement. The only thing that's left on the table is a no-deal Brexit, and that's what we're going for. And everyone else is.
So do you believe, Chris, that this is Chris, do you believe that the COVID-19 virus has given Michael Gove and his cabinet members the excuse that they want really to get out of having to do a deal with the EU?
I call me cynical, Gordon, but yes.
I would never call you that, Chris.
In a word, yes. This is their get out clause, and you know that every capitalist will look for a silver lining, you know, in order to cover the back, you know, because they need a scapegoat to deflect from their own ideology, and they are not willing to, you know, I mean, the SNP parliamentary group have made representations to the UK government and asked them to stop and delay any negotiations on Brexit and think of the bigger issue, and they have refused to do so. You know, they have dismissed that out of hand. Mike Russell said so much on Sunday's edition of the Full Scottish. So you know, they will bullishly plough ahead. You know, and you know, I mean. I mean, going back to Boris Johnson's speech this afternoon, you know, he used the phrase again of "get things done."
Yes, going back to this.
You know, that is their mantra.
Well, Sam, if I can bring you in at this point, I have read elsewhere that Michel Barnier is very unhappy about this. And he's saying, apparently, that the UK government is being very intransigent, digging its heels in. And he's beginning to suspect that it's not going to be possible to do a deal at all, especially when the British government has said that it will not move on things like the common the common fisheries policy. They will not accept that, and nor will they accept the authority of the European Court of Human Rights. So that leaves that leaves Britain with very little of a safety net, it would seem.
Yeah, I agree totally with Chris. I think this is the COVID-19, sorry to say, is the perfect excuse for them to get away with doing a no deal. And I don't think they're going to stop. And I think they're going to dig their heels in and just go for it. And the excuse will be COVID-19. And I mean, the thing is, we've just seen time and time again, they just plough ahead with not much thought. And it's as long as they're kind of pretty much kind of getting their own way, and this kind of getting things done slogan, it's just absolutely horrendous. But yeah, I agree totally what Chris had says. Yeah, I'm as cynical as Chris. Yeah.
Well, it seems that the European Union's diplomats would agree with you there. Britain has, I say Britain, I mean basically the Conservative government has taken a very tough line with the European Union. They've drawn all these red lines that they will not cross. Like they will not take part in the common fisheries policy. They will not allow the Court of Human Rights to have any jurisdiction over the UK. They want to be as separate as possible from Europe, but they're demanding the same deal that they had before. It can't be realistic, surely, for them to make that sort of demand.
Yeah, it's just sheer arrogance. It's absolute sheer arrogance. That's all it is. There's no negotiation. It's their way or no way, and and it's like hell mend what the consequences are, as long as they kind of get we're out of they get Brexit done and get out of Europe. And this is just not the time and place. I mean, this should be put on hold. I mean, as Nicola Sturgeon had said today as well, at the moment her focus is on dealing with the COVID-19. Surely to goodness that's what the UK government should be doing. Their focus should be solely on COVID-19, getting the population through this, and making sure that everybody's safe, especially because there's a knock-on effect affecting people's health as well and other matters. So yeah, that should be their sole purpose right now, is dealing with the current issues, and just put Brexit on hold and then revisit it once we've got get one situation under control. But yeah, it's just sheer arrogance. It's just absolute sheer arrogance that's coming from the Tory government right now.
It seems that they are dead set on driving us over this Brexit cliff edge. Just as we're coming out of the COVID crisis and thinking that we're beginning to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, we discover it's a train coming the other way. But anyway, let's leave this for the moment and look now to Europe. Now, Europe is about to restart car factories amid an uncertain demand. The German car-making giant Volkswagen today resumed production at its biggest factory as a part of a broader industry drive to get back to work in Europe, where the coronavirus pandemic has hammered demand and pushed up inventory levels. Encouraged by a fall in infection rates, Germany has eased lockdown rules, and automakers are relying on the country's ability to trace and contain new coronavirus cases to safely restore operations in Europe's largest economy. The Volkswagen Group, which also owns Skoda, Audi, Bentley, Porsche and Seat brands, is resuming production at its plants in Wolfsburg, Germany, as well as at factories in Portugal, Spain, Russia, South Africa and the Czech Republic this week. Production capacity at Wolfsburg will be just around 10 to 15% to begin with, and will reach around 40% of pre-crisis levels after about a week. Andreas Tossmann, the Volkswagen brand's board member responsible for production, told Reuters today. The restart of Europe's biggest car factory after weeks of standstill is an important symbol for our employees, our dealers, suppliers, the German economy and for Europe, he said. Volkswagen's plans mirror moves by rivals Renault, Peugeot and Fiat Chrysler to revive an industry crippled by dealership lockdowns and supply bottlenecks caused by restrictions to contain the pandemic. Fiat Chrysler has restarted Italian production at its plant in Atessa and has begun preparatory work in Cassino, Pomiglano, Termoli and at Mirafiori. The Swedish truck maker AB Volvo, whose brands include Mack and Renault trucks, is also looking to restart output, despite saying last week that its net orders had turned negative since the end of March as customers cancelled more trucks than they ordered. With dealerships closed in Germany until last week, it's hard for executives to gauge the level of demand. LMC Automotive analysts see an uneven pattern across the globe. We assume that light vehicle sales will bottom out in April in Europe and North America, but the recovery, while broadly V-shaped, is unlikely to be rapid in the subsequent months, they said. Car makers have overhauled production methods to try to reassure workers about safety of returning to the production lines. Chris, let me come to you first on this one. This is obviously it's an industrial story. It's a story of factories getting back to work in Germany because apparently Germany has better tracing and isolation techniques for the coronavirus and therefore are able to restart without the same levels of social distancing, it would seem.
Well, no, I I have to disagree with you on that because I have actually read quite into this, and they are doing it with a level of social distancing on the shop floor. They have identified a process, including automation, where they can still maintain a certain level of social distancing.
Right. I stand corrected, Chris.
For their workforce. What it is that predominantly Angela Merkel has, caved in to big business in order to restart the industrialised sector of Germany.
Because Germany has huge exports, doesn't it?
Sorry?
Germany has enormous exports particularly of cars.
Yeah. The actual export market on Germany is vital to the German economy, and it's not just Audi. Volkswagen. As many people would surmise, Volkswagen own many different car makes. So it is vital for that economy to restart as soon as it can. So on one side you could say that it's good to see that the industry picking up and sort of like going on, but other people will say, is it too far too soon? Only time will tell. I mean, we have to remember that in the round that Europe got the COVID pandemic 4 or 5 weeks, maybe even 6 weeks ahead of the UK.
Indeed, yes. So they are ahead of the curve from us.
It is only right to think that, if the likes of Germany and France, Spain, Italy are thinking about reopening factories and stuff like that, as we've seen in China, then obviously there is a curve flattening in sight. But the important thing is that the business to recommence has to be done in such a way that we don't see a resurgence of a second phase, and that is obviously trial and error.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Sam, one of the things that struck me when Chris was talking there about restarting the German car manufacturing business is the restarting manufacturing, but is there actually going to be a demand for cars? Because there are so many competing pressures on the car industry at the moment to, first of all, to get rid of diesel cars eventually, of which Germany produces probably the most of all, and to try and electrify cars. Are the German car manufacturing companies going to be manufacturing cars which nobody wants?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's what I was kind of going through my head when you were kind of reading the story there, Gordon.
Yeah.
The fact that, I know they're kind of back to manufacturing. They're ahead of us in terms of the COVID crisis.
Yep.
But even at the moment, we're still kind of early days. And even for importing cars into the UK, our dealerships are all closed at the moment. I mean, I would imagine more of the demand would be coming from parts for garages being able to fix people's cars, especially at the moment. But yeah, it's people, especially with lockdown, especially even in Germany and France and various other countries in Europe who are slowly starting to open back up again. There's still some restrictions of movement, so you wonder how the car manufacturing is going to recover from that.
Sam, I was just going to say, somebody had suggested to me today that now might be the very best time for the German car industry to abandon diesel production completely and run down the petrol production and ramp up all of the electric car production, since they've got this time in hand now to do it.
Yeah, that would be a thing, they could look at. The only thing is when they're looking into the electric car, depending where you are in the world, depends on how the electric car runs. Because if it runs off a battery, where they get the components from, are they environmentally sustainable? Same way when they're, you plug in, where's that electricity coming from? Is it coming from a renewable source, or is it coming from fossil fuel? So this maybe would give them all a chance to kind of sit, while things are kind of slow at the moment, to sit and kind of rethink all these things through.
Yeah, it seems obvious, Sam, that there have to be other major developments in other industries before electric cars really start to sort of explode onto the market.
Gordon, can I just make a quick point now?
Of course,
go right ahead, Chris. Point.
And
so far as this is vitally what Nicola Sturgeon said, is that once we come out of this pandemic and sort of like go into a recovery mode for industry, it is the best platform in order for Scotland to apply that just transition that Scotland is looking for, where we have a more greener, developed industry, which doesn't rely as heavily as it has done in the past on fossil fuels. So
I would hope so, Chris. Unfortunately, we're still part of the United Kingdom, and as far as I remember, energy is not a devolved matter at the moment. Anyway,
no, that is correct, and I'm glad that you made that point, Gordon. But Scotland can lead the way.
Indeed, yes, I agree with you, Chris. It could. Listen, we're running a little low on time, but what I wanted to do is link this current subject that we're talking about with cars to our next item, which is crude oil. Now, Brent crude has fallen below $20 a barrel. Oil prices slumped again on Monday on concerns over scarce storage capacity, especially in the United States, and global economic doldrums from the coronavirus pandemic. The US oil futures led losses, falling by more than $4 a barrel on fears that storage at Cushing, Oklahoma, could reach full capacity soon. US West Texas Intermediate June futures were down $4.63 or 27.3% to $12.31 a barrel at just 14:06 GMT. Brent crude was down $1.8 or 8% at $19.63 a barrel. The June Brent contract expires on Thursday. Oil futures marked their third straight week of losses last week, with Brent ending 24% down and a WTI of about 7%. Prices have now fallen for 8 of the last 9 weeks. The Organisation of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and allies, including Russia, a group known as OPEC+, this month pledged to cut output by an unprecedented 9.7 million barrels a day in May and June. Kuwait and Azerbaijan are coordinating oil output cuts, while Russia is set to reduce its western seaborne exports by half in May. So, Chris, I'm going to return to you briefly on this again, because this is definitely linked to what we were talking about before. The car industry is about to start up at a time when oil prices are through the floor. Now, you would think, most people would think that means petrol prices are going to fall, and they have come down a little bit, but they tend to follow a much slower path downwards than they do upwards. Is it possible that motoring is somehow about to become a lot cheaper, with a lot of cars to be sold and oil at knockdown prices?
Yeah, well, Gordon, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I made the point, and I was recalling a thing that my father said to me when I was very young. And he was basically saying, if you want to know if there's, something afoot within sort of like British politics, you only have to look at the prices on the forecourt. And that's basically where, the arse falls out the trousers, because everything is so reliant on the price of a barrel of oil.
Because oil is the lifeblood of industry.
Sorry?
I was just saying that, of course, oil is the lifeblood of industry.
Yeah,
because it's what makes things move.
And it is the you can compare it to a fine glass of red wine for your average capitalist, because they can make the most money out of it because it's such a lucrative commodity.
Yeah.
But you know, things have to change, and this is again what I was saying earlier on about the fact that you know, Nicola made the point that we have the chance to start again and reset the way that our industry goes forward with that just transition, and moving away from the fossil fuels, and let everyone else, you know, scurry around, with regards of dragging in their black gold and stuff like that. The one benefit from this that I'm looking forward to is the fact that when the price of a barrel for Saudi Arabia goes down to $5 a barrel, hopefully that will stop them from bombing the Donald Duck out of Yemen, because the oil prices have completely flattened throughout the...
So you think it might affect the ability of Saudi Arabia to wage a remote war against Yemen? An interesting one. Sam, can I turn to you? I'm sure, like most of us, Sam, you have always had issues with cars, and the price of fuel in the UK is probably one of the highest priced countries in the world for petrol, even though we have an enormous supply of oil, which always struck me as incredible. Where does all the money go that we could have saved had we had cheaper petrol, you know?
Yeah, the one that always used to amuse me, for many years I lived in Grangemouth, right across the road from the refinery, and what always amazed me was if I went into the petrol station just across the road, it was more expensive to buy fuel there than it was for me to drive through to Loch Lomond, visit family and get fuel through here. That just always amazed me, and I've never ever had an answer as to why that was. So if anybody's watching that knows that answer, let me know. You know, I just found that just absolutely amazing, because they could literally run a pipe from under, you know, the road. You know, I know that sounds a bit crude. You know, they could just run a pipe. I know it's a lot more than that, but that just. And I think with the crisis that's happening now, it just shows that if you put all your eggs in the one basket,
of course, the lower,
what happens to an economy, and you know, and this is the ideal time, and for us to start kind of, you know, forging ahead with renewable sources, because Scotland has got so many natural sources already, and we are actually quite good in the renewable industry. So it'd be really good now to be forging ahead as you know, when we're coming out the other side of this. And yes, it's not a devolved matter for the Scottish Government, but there is other ways. You know, we have got a lot of good resources out there that, we should be tapping into more, you know, investing more in, and, you know, looking towards that future without the fossil fuels. My only concern is, especially for a place like Grangemouth, with staying there, I know that there's a certain amount of employment that is really reliant on Grangemouth.
Yes.
So there would need to be something in place. There's got to be something in place to protect those jobs.
Yeah, I believe.
Or to go into the renewable industry.
Sam, I was going to say, I believe that there have been plans for, alternative plans for other uses for Grangemouth, including reducing plastic waste and turning it back into natural gas and things like that. We are running perilously short on time, I'm afraid, so we're moving to our final couple of stories now. And the next one is actually about gambling. The things that are most usually taxed in this country, of course, are things like petrol and gambling. The gambling advertising is to be removed during the COVID lockdown. Ronnie Cowan, MP, SNP, Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Gambling-Related Harm, has welcomed the announcement that betting companies will remove TV and radio advertising during the COVID-19 period. The Betting and Gaming Council the industry standards body, which represents betting shops, online betting and gaming, and bingo and casinos, has agreed the voluntary removal of all gaming product advertising as a further part of its response to the COVID-19 lockdown. Despite a drop in advertising spend and volume of TV, sport and casino advertisements dropping by up to 10%. On the 2nd of April, the APPG on gambling-related harm wrote to the Minister for Gambling, Nigel Huddleston MP, to ask if they will put in place tighter restrictions on online gambling during the COVID-19 crisis. Mr Cowan said, "I welcome the decision of the Betting and Gaming Council for listening to the many voices, including the all-party parliamentary group on gambling-related harm, who have called on the need for action on gambling and gaming advertising during the current COVID-19 outbreak. This is a clear recognition of the harm the advertising is doing and something we raised way back in early April. This is another step in the right direction, but we on the APPG will not let up and ensure that there is a review of gambling advertising post-coronavirus pandemic." Chris, if I might speak with you on this one, gambling initially was illegal in this country for many years until Gordon Brown's regime kind of legitimised it. And since then, the industry seems to have burgeoned into something enormous with many online gambling companies. Now, I imagine that during a time when people are locked in their homes, that many of them will take advantage of these online gambling services. And that, I believe, can become quite addictive in some cases. What do you think, Chris?
I'm fervently against gambling platforms in any such way, shape or form. I personally suffered myself when I was a teenager. I was addicted to gambling and fruit machines predominantly. And it manifested itself again when I was in the catering industry. Quite a lot of chefs go to the casino and stuff like that because they can get a drink at 2 o'clock in the morning and socialise. That was our sort of like time to escape. So I absolutely hate gambling now, and I am sick to the back teeth of all the constant adverts which are enticing people who don't have any money to, gamble away what money that they have.
And it is always the poorest, Chris, who gamble the most.
This is long overdue. I hope that Ronnie is watching. Ronnie, thanks very much. You're an absolute stalwart in this. I've monitored his work on the APPG with regards to this, because I've been calling for this for a long time. Such is my vehement hate of any gambling platforms, I was actually sad, just to actually make one quick point. I was actually sad to hear that the British Grand Prix is going to recommence behind closed doors, which, is not a great help because people will want to gamble on that.
Yeah, people gamble on anything these days.
Why the government are allowing that to take place is absolutely beyond me.
But listen, thanks for that, Chris. And the final story tonight, Sam, I'll let you take this story once I'm finished this preamble. And that is support for perinatal mental health. Mums, dads and families at risk of poor mental health during pregnancy and the early years will be able to access enhanced peer support, parenting support and perinatal counselling services with new annual funding of up to £1 million. The Perinatal and Infant Mental Health Fund will provide crucial help by supporting third sector organisations to deliver key services and address gaps in provision. Inspiring Scotland will run the fund, which will be open to charities from August, and will work with the Scottish Government to achieve the goals of the Perinatal and Infant Mental Health Programme Board. The Minister for Mental Health, Claire Haughey, said, "The third sector provides an invaluable source of support for the mental health of women, babies and their families during pregnancy and early parenthood. Last year, the Scottish Government provided funding to support the work of the third sector organisations in this area, and I'm delighted that we're able to build on this with new Perinatal and Infant Mental Health Fund. The fund will allow one-to-one support for organisations to help provide the services that women and their families need across Scotland. So Sam, I wanted you to take this one because I wanted a woman's view on this, and obviously Chris can't really supply me with that. What do you think? Isn't this good news for helping women who are suffering from poor mental health during pregnancy and shortly after?
You know something? It's about time. This is long overdue. Because it's an issue, it's one of these issues that's not spoken about. I mean, we've only get used to talking about postnatal depression, which I suffered from with my 3 children. And that's only now became more open and more openly spoke about. But one of the other taboo subjects is when women are pregnant, and not just the women, the men as well, dads as well, because it affects dads as well, because it's that even though the pregnancy may be planned and everything else, but when it actually happens, it's all those emotions and fears and expectations that all kind of kick in. And so, parents, both sets of parents need to have that support. And it is so important. Yes, we take care of all the kind of physical side of pregnancy, but the mental side of pregnancy, we don't. And we're actually, as a culture, quite poor in that. There's some cultures that are really, really good at that.
I was just going to say, Sam, that, as a father myself, and in the case of my first child, my wife had a very difficult pregnancy and an emergency C-section. And because it was an emergency, she was anaesthetised and didn't see any of it. And she felt terrible that she had actually missed the birth of her first child. I felt terrible because I had to witness an emergency operation standing 2 feet away from her at the time. So I was traumatised, and she felt that she had this parental right taken away. And it is very upsetting.
It is, and I think that's the thing. People just think of pregnancy being a bed of roses, and and
they don't always go right.
And it's not like that. I mean, because when I was pregnant with my first boy, who's now 26, I had to think there. He was born in Germany. So we were actually under the British military health care. Which is a total different ball, slightly different from NHS again. And, so they kind of took into consideration some of the German medical healthcare and things. So my healthcare over in Germany was completely different from the NHS here, because they really did. The midwives and everything were amazing. I suffer from really severe morning sickness to the point that I nearly lost my life with my first child because I was so badly dehydrated and everything with the sickness, and I had to be hospitalised. And but there was and I was quite lucky. The consultant I was under, he was a German doctor who basically explained what this morning sickness was, how it worked, how the hormones affected my body, and how this wasn't going to go away. I was going to have this until the moment I gave birth, and I was going to have to take medication. He explained it all. But once I had when I was pregnant with my second son, who's now 19, and I was back in the UK under NHS, it was just, you've got morning sickness, you'll be fine. And I had to go through this thing of trying to explain. The NHS is brilliant in the maternity care and dealing with the, the physical and things, but the mental side of it. And and I thought, wait a minute, I need to go through all this, and what about this morning sickness and all this again? But it's really good. It's very important because, as you say, I mean, as parents, we don't get given an instruction manual.
No, you don't, Sam. That's the thing.
It can be quite scary.
And once you go home with your child, you're basically left alone with nothing and no support, really, no mental support. This certainly goes a long way to helping that. Well, listen, on that happy note, we're going to conclude tonight's programme. So it just remains for me to thank both my guests, Chris McCusker and Sam Payton, for their input tonight. As usual, we are going to ask you for money because we are a free service and we rely on you to help us make programmes. So if you would like to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions on your screen now by going to www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register. That's it from the Monday edition of Scotland at 7. I will be back on Thursday. Kenny will be taking over for Tuesday and Wednesday. But that's it from Scotland at 7 tonight. A very good night to you.